It's commonly taught within mainstream Christianity that when a Christian dies, they go straight to heaven to be with Jesus. But is this actually true? Where does this belief come from? Stick around to find out. As I start this teaching, I want to direct your attention to the pre-flood patriarch Enoch. Enoch had the reputation of being an extremely righteous man, so righteous that God removed him from the earth and brought him to dwell in the heavens, or at least that's what tradition has handed down to us. Genesis 5:24 says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The ambiguity contained in this short text definitely leaves us with more questions than answers. What does "and he was not" mean? And where did God take him? Let's see if the writer of Hebrews can help clear this passage up for us. Hebrews 11:5 says, By faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For prior to being taken up, he was approved as being pleasing to God. Again, Christian tradition would have us believing that Enoch was such a faithful man that he was taken up to where Yahweh lives, in the heavens, and that he didn't die, or see death, as Hebrews 11 words it. But if this truly is the case, that Enoch is currently alive in the heavens, then we have a glaring problem of theological incongruence. When the Son of God came to earth to dwell in flesh like ours, he made the following assertion. John 3:13 says, And no one has ascended into heaven, but he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. So, either Jesus lied, or the writers of Genesis and Hebrews fibbed. Which is it? Facetiousness aside, the answer is that traditional Christian interpretation has led us astray. No man can ascend through the firmament of heaven, except for the Son of God who came down from heaven, who then went back up through the heavens in his resurrected immortal body. So what do we make of our brother Enoch then? It's imperative that we search out what being taken up so that he would not see death actually means. Could Enoch be an exception to the rule I read in John 3:13? Definitely not. Though most adherents of Protestantism won't like this, the answers that are given to us regarding what actually occurred with Enoch happen to exist outside of their traditional canon of 66 books. Jubilees 4:23 says, And he, Enoch, was taken from amongst the children of men, and we, the angels, conducted him into the Garden of Eden in majesty and honor. All of a sudden we're dealing with a diametrically opposed scenario. Orthodoxy espouses that he was taken up to heaven, which would be above the firmament, whereas the Book of Jubilees, a book that has remained in the Ethiopian Coptic Christian canon for thousands of years, provides us with the much needed context that we're searching for. Enoch was escorted from out of the midst of mankind by angels, and was then placed inside of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve had formerly dwelt before they were banished. Another ancient writing that has been attributed to our man in question, that being 1 Enoch, matches the details found in Jubilees chapter 4. 1 Enoch 12:1-2 says, Before these things Enoch was hidden, and none of the children of men knew where he was hidden, and where he abode, and what had become of him. And his activities had to do with the watchers, and his days were with the holy ones. The writer of Hebrews can claim that Enoch was not found because 1 Enoch tells us that the children of men couldn't find him and had no idea what became of him. Hebrews can also assert that Enoch was taken so as not to see death, because its author would have been familiar with the teachings of 1 Enoch and Jubilees. The statement that Enoch did not see death is not in relation to his own death, but rather to what he would have stopped witnessing taking place on the earth around him, because he was conducted into the Garden of Eden and away from all the death that was taking place. The 6th, 7th, and 8th chapters of 1st Enoch describe a world when rebellious angels had once taken wives for themselves from amidst the daughters of men and commingled with them, resulting in the unlawful introduction of a hybrid offspring who would be renowned as the Nephilim giants, creatures that were never written in Yahweh's Book of Life. These giants oppressed mankind and corrupted the earth. The angels who fathered the Nephilim also taught mankind how to make weapons of warfare and how to make women more seductive. Plants and animals were intentionally being corrupted, and men were learning how to kill each other. It was out of this very chaotic atmosphere that Enoch was extracted. He went to reside with the holy watcher angels in the Garden of Eden, a paradise that was still on the earth during the days of Noah. Just as the writer of Hebrews accurately stated that people die once, and after that, they are judged. The same rule applies to Enoch. In the 7th chapter of the book of Jubilees, Noah spoke to his sons, saying, "And I also will give you commandment, my sons, as Enoch commanded his son in the first Jubilees. While still living, the 7th in his generation, he commanded and testified to his son and to his son's sons until the day of his death." The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has known about the death of Enoch for millennia because they've had Jubilees in their possession this whole time. Jubilees completely dispels the myth of Enoch being taken up to heaven and testifies to his death, which is in fact asserted in the book of Hebrews as well. But most Christians can't pick up on it because of their cognitive dissonance. When we peruse the 11th chapter of Hebrews, a section of Hebrews that is often referred to as the Hall of Faith chapter, the writer moves from one man to another, making mention of their deeds, which they mixed with their faith, and concludes the chapter by stating, "All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us." Enoch is one of these people that Hebrews mentions. No man, aside from Christ, has been made perfect yet. God provides us with that immortal perfection on the day of the Lord, when every faithful in-covenant believer will receive the promises of God through the resurrecting power of His Son. Shalom fam, I just wanted to quickly announce that I've joined forces with an awesome merch company called Sanctified Supply Co. They're a whole Bible-believing company with a mission of spreading their conversation-starting products all across the plane of God's green earth. As you can see, I'm wearing a "We Must Hang on His Words" tee. All of their apparel is personally screen printed in their mom and pop shop in the good old US of A. So if you'd like to support my ministry and their company, head on over to sanctifiedsupplyco.com and toss one of these t-shirts into your cart. Type in Ken10 at checkout and save 10% on your entire order. Check the link in this video's description for quick access. If it is indeed true that Enoch wasn't taken through the firmament of heaven and had eventually died, then what do we do with one of Israel's greatest prophets, Elijah? 2 Kings 2:11 says, "As they were going along and talking, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and it separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind to heaven." The writer of 2 Kings informs us that Elijah and his protege, Elisha, were out walking and having a chat when Elijah was suddenly whisked up into heaven by a whirlwind. There's something I'd like to highlight in this passage before I move on to the next text. What I'd like to point out is that the text does not say that he went above the firmament of heaven, but that the whirlwind brought him up to heaven. This may sound confusing and possibly contradictory to what was explained earlier regarding how no man can pass through the heavens and live, save Yeshua of Nazareth. Oddly enough, Genesis chapter 1 can help us better understand how the word heaven can be understood here. Genesis 1 verse 20 in the Septuagint says, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth reptiles having life, and winged creatures flying above the earth in the firmament of heaven. And it was so." Birds fly in the firmament of heaven. Does that mean that birds can pass through the firmament of heaven? No. The firmament that is above our heads encases us within the land that we were created and commanded to multiply and spread out upon. So, the open air from the land up to the firmament can and does get referred to as heaven, because everything below the firmament is technically enclosed within it. All that said, Elijah was not translated above the firmament of heaven. Rather, he was snatched away to another location, much like Philip was in Acts chapter 8. This truth makes much more sense of the timing found in the next passage. 2 Chronicles 21:12 says, "Then a letter came to him being King Jehoram, from Elijah the prophet, saying," At the time of Jehoram's sin, Elijah was able to personally write the letter found in 2 Chronicles chapter 21 and have it delivered through a courier. After the whirlwind experience of 2 Kings chapter 2, Elijah lived out the remainder of his days in a secret location, in like manner to how Enoch was conducted into the Garden of Eden and removed from out of the sight of men. One last text that solidifies the unpopular idea that Elijah is not alive and residing in the heavens along with Enoch is found in the Wisdom of Sirach, a book that has always been included in the Greek Septuagint. Wisdom of Sirach 48 verses 12 to 14 says, "It was Elijah who was covered by the whirlwind, and Elisha was filled with his spirit. In all his days he did not tremble before any ruler, and no one brought him into subjection. Nothing was too hard for him. And when he was dead, his body prophesied. As in his life he did wonders, so in death his deeds were marvelous." This book does not mince words regarding the death of Elijah. And again, this shouldn't be a shocker. All people are appointed to die once, which certainly does not exclude Elijah. At this point you may be thinking, alright, maybe Enoch and Elijah didn't get an exclusive pass into heaven, but what about the verses that prove that the thief on the cross went to heaven with Jesus? Or the verses in Paul's letters that absolutely indicate that we go straight to heaven when we die? If this is you thinking this, I would kindly direct you to one of my videos called Paradise Found. I fully expound on the following passage in that video. Luke 23:43 says, "Jesus answered him, 'Truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise.'" Notice the comma is placed after the word today instead of before it. It completely changes the meaning of what Jesus told the thief on the cross. Translators have shown their biases by incorrectly placing the comma before the word today, which would have Jesus telling the man that he would be joining him in heaven that very day after they both died on their crosses. However, the scriptures tell us that Jesus went to Sheol for 3 days after his death and did not go to heaven. So we must keep that context in consideration when addressing this passage. Paradise is a word that is used synonymously with the Garden of Eden, which is planted within the New Jerusalem, a city that God built with his hands and currently safeguards in the third heaven. The kingdom comes down to the earth at the last day, which is when we get resurrected and placed within it. Now, let's move to 2 specific Pauline passages that get misquoted and torn away from their original contextual meanings. 2 Corinthians 5 verses 6 to 8 says, "Therefore, being always of good courage, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, and prefer, rather, to be absent from the body, and to be at home with the Lord." To be absent from the body is to be immediately present with the Lord, right? Is that what Paul actually communicates here? Not at all. Paul expressed the sentiment that his Corinthian brothers and sisters would prefer to be absent from their bodies and to be at home with the Lord. Being absent from your body means you have died the first death. A large part of the first death is that your soul has migrated into Sheol, where it rests and waits for the resurrection of your new body. When that takes place, you'll be ushered into God's coming kingdom, thus completely fulfilling your preference of being at home with Yahweh. There's specific timing for these events, friends. Paul knew that, and so did the ones that he taught these things to. Let's look at another text from Paul that gets misused. Philippians 1:21 to 24 says, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. But if I am to live on in the flesh, this will mean fruitful labor for me, and I do not know what I will choose. But I am hard pressed between the two, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better. Yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake." Is this saying that if Paul chose to die, he would instantly be with Christ in heaven? No. Again, if we neglect the ample context that Paul and many other authors of Scripture provide us with elsewhere in the Bible, then isolating certain passages so as to fit an unscriptural narrative is rather easy to do. Folks, I too would prefer to be absent from this body of mortality and to be free from the troubles and darkness of this world. I'd love to dwell in the presence of our righteous Father. However, my feelings don't change God's timing for how these literal events unfold as revealed in His Word. Some of the men whom we call the early church fathers shared the same attitude. In Justin Martyr's dialogue with a Jew named Trypho, he remarked, "I choose to follow not men or men's doctrines, but God and the doctrines delivered by Him. For if you have fallen in with some who are called Christians, but who do not admit this truth, and venture to blaspheme the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, who say there is no resurrection of the dead, and that their souls, when they die, are taken to heaven, do not imagine that they are Christians." Justin Martyr lived in and around the early to mid part of the 2nd century. There was such a very brief period of time between he and the last of the apostles for pockets of early Christians to be believing in something so contrary to the sound doctrine that the Scriptures actually taught. Justin knew that the souls of men do not go to heaven when they die. He rightly attributed such a belief to being a doctrine of man. Irenaeus, also a 2nd century Greek bishop, referred to this stance as being strictly Gnostic in nature. The heretics, Gnostics, do not acknowledge the salvation of their flesh, but claim that immediately upon death, they will pass above the heavens and demiurge, creator, and go to the mother or to the father, whom they pretend exists. For they do not choose to understand that if these things are as they say, the Lord Himself, in whom they profess to believe, did not rise again upon the 3rd day. Rather, immediately upon His expiring on the cross, He undoubtedly departed on high, leaving His body to the earth. The Lord observed the law of the dead, so that He might become the first begotten from the dead. And He waited until the 3rd day in the lower parts of the earth. Accordingly, these men, the Gnostics, must be put to confusion, who allege that the lower parts refer to this world of ours, but that their inner man, leaving the body here, ascends into the supercelestial place. The Lord went away in the midst of the shadow of death, where the souls of the dead were. However, afterwards, He arose in the body, and after the resurrection, He was taken up into heaven. From this, it is clear that the souls of His disciples also, upon whose account the Lord underwent these things, will go away into the invisible place allowed to them by God. And they will remain there until the resurrection, awaiting that event. Then receiving their bodies, and rising to their entirety, that is, bodily, just as the Lord arose, they will come in that manner into the presence of God. Irenaeus spent quite a bit of his life acknowledging just how far off the biblical rails the Gnostics of his day had clearly gone. Believing that a Christian goes straight to heaven upon death is still widely accepted as biblical truth today, even though there are no scriptural texts to actually support this view. In this next quote by Irenaeus, Irenaeus accurately draws his argument upon Christ's experience as a flesh and blood man and what He underwent at the moment He expired on the cross with what takes place when all other men perish. He says, "No disciple is above the master. Our master, therefore, did not at once depart, taking flight into heaven. Rather, He awaited the time of His resurrection, as determined by the Father. Likewise, we also should await the time of our resurrection, determined by God." In other words, Christians don't get to experience something completely different than God's only begotten Son did when He passed away. If anyone deserved to bypass Hades and go straight to heaven, it would be Jesus, wouldn't it? But that's not what happened. He wasn't treated any different. When He died, His soul descended into the lower parts of the earth, and He waited for His Father to resurrect Him. Hippolytus, a late 2nd century theologian, understood all of this. He knew that the underworld was a necessary stage once a human being dies. He said, "But now we must speak of Hades. in which the souls both of the righteous and the unrighteous are detained. Tertullian, a mid-2nd century apologist, asserted that all souls, therefore, are shut up within Hades. Hades, which is the Greek equivalent of the Hebrew word Sheol, is simply a holding cell for the dead. It's a necessary compartment that Yahweh created with the intention of destroying in the lake of fire once it is rendered obsolete at its appointed time. Novatian, a mid-3rd century scholar, priest, and theologian, has this to say about Hades. And truly, what lies beneath the earth is not itself void of distributed and arranged powers. For there is a place, singular, whither the souls of the just and the unjust are taken. That place is not heaven or hell. Both the just and unjust are taken to their respective compartments within the greater holding chamber that is referred to as Hades. Now, it's imperative to keep in mind that all of the aforementioned quotes were spoken several decades after the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. There was nothing about Christ's resurrection that changed God's plan and timeline for when all of his future immortal children would undergo their own bodily resurrection. What's fascinating about all of this is that even while Gnosticism, which was technically considered a minority religious system among Jewish and early Christian sects, was beginning to build some strength in various religious communities, it wasn't until the 17th century when a wholesale shift in doctrine relating to the afterlife took place in Christianity. Enter the Westminster Confession of Faith. When the Westminster Confession of Faith manifested, which is the creedal bedrock for the Reformed Church and the Puritan faith, it stripped out any intermediate state. It was now instantaneous heaven or hell for the human soul. Section 32 of the Westminster Confession of Faith reads, "The bodies of men after death return to dust and see corruption. But their souls, which neither die nor sleep, having an immortal subsistence, immediately return to God who gave them. The souls of the righteous, being then made perfect in holiness, are received into the highest heavens, where they behold the face of God, in light and glory, waiting for the full redemption of their bodies. And the souls of the wicked are cast into hell, where they remain in torments and utter darkness, reserved to the judgment of the great day. Besides these two places, for souls separated from their bodies, the scripture acknowledges none." Folks, the scriptures do indeed acknowledge a place where all the souls of men go upon death. I have devoted an entire playlist of videos titled The Underworld, which highlights the majority of said passages and exegetes them accurately for the sake of those who truly want to know what God has said about where they will go after this mortal life is over. Please feel free to check that playlist out and test them to the Word of God. My prayer is that this video will aid you in your understanding of the scriptures. Place your trust in Yahweh. We must always hang on his words. Shalom.